Hey everyone, happy holidays. I hope you're having a good end of the year, staying safe and all that. Coming to you today to talk about some records that I bought in December. Really excited to go record shopping again after being away from it for quite a while. I went record shopping for Record Store Day back in June, and that was kind of the only opportunity I'd had in like the last 2 years. So I was really excited to get out there again in December. I went a few different places. Record fair in Des Moines in the beginning of the month. Then I went to Chicago to meet up with some coworkers, went record shopping there, and then went to Southern Illinois to visit some family, with record shopping there. So we'll do this in chronological order, starting with the records that I got at the record fair in Des Moines at the beginning of December. First up is The Cure's Faith, The Cure's third album. And this is, I'm a little ashamed to say, the first Cure album that I have in my collection. I really like The Cure, and I've been collecting records for like 10 years, but somehow they've always evaded me because their albums are always pretty pricey. And especially considering, they were big in the 80s, but then had a lot of stuff in the late 80s and the 90s, which is just difficult to find. It's an era that's hard to find on vinyl for a reasonable price. Just never had the chance to get any of their work. So this was like $18 or something. So at this point, I'm like, if I can find a Cure record for like under $20, I'm just going to get it. And this did it for me. So Faith, The Cure's third album from the early 80s. I really like this one. When they were still, it kind of felt like post-punky before they got really kind of dreamy in the mid to late 80s. But still that just kind of classic, dramatic, gothic Cure sound. Great record. Excited to finally have The Cure represented in my record collection. Next up, we've got David Bowie's Heroes, the second album from David Bowie's Berlin trilogy, and a glaring gap in my collection up to this point. I've got most of David Bowie's early work, 60s, 70s, and 80s, but I hadn't been able to find this one. This is a more recent repress, I think from 2018, and I'm fine with that. Heroes is an album I don't really feel compelled to hold out for an original pressing of. It's honestly not one of my more favorites of his. I know that a lot of people would put this in maybe their like top 5. I don't even know if I'd put it in my top 10. But that's not to say that I dislike it. It's more just a testament to how great David Bowie's entire collection is. So excited to have this one fill out that hole in my collection. Next up is Queens of the Stone Age, Lullabies to Paralyze. This is a 2019 pressing. Some of the earlier vinyl pressings have an alternate cover, kind of the creepy one of like the guys in the woods, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm fine having this one. This is just an album I've really wanted for a while because I think after this, the only two Queens of the Stone Age albums I have left are Villains and Era Vulgaris. And this is one that, it's not one of my more favorite ones of theirs, but every time I listen to it, I like it a little bit more. There's some really killer tracks on here. There's that kind of in the woods photo I mentioned on the back there. And this has a pretty cool gatefold. So it's in great shape. Excited to have it. I'll have to put this on sometime soon. Who knows when? I've got a lot to get to. Next up is Converge, The Dusk in Us. This album came out in 2017, was Converge's most recent album before the recent Blood Moon album with Chelsea Wolfe, which is really great too. But just a solid band, solid metalcore, heavy ass band. If you haven't checked them out, please do. And The Dusk in Us is a solid one. Their album Jane Doe is kind of a classic by this point. I think my personal favorite is All We Love We Leave Behind. But yeah, when I saw this one, I knew I had to have it. You can probably see too, it's got this cool kind of like glossy, refractive cover where you get lots of colors reflecting off of it. And I think that's pretty neat just from an artwork perspective. So Converge's The Dusk in Us. Check it out. Next one is one that probably most of you will know, Weezer's Green Album. I've got Rivers Cuomo staring over my shoulder in approval. A lot of people stop after Pinkerton. I personally really love Green Album and Maladroit. Those are two of my favorites of theirs. Now, from what I've read, this is a 2016 repressing that actually did not get a lot of good reviews on Discogs from what I've seen. Apparently, it's kind of a noisy, not too high quality pressing. This is the first time I've just ever seen it out in the wild at any kind of affordable price, so I wanted to take a gamble on it. If it's not great, maybe I'll sell it back. I don't know, but still, I'm happy to have it. I've got, I think, pretty much all of my other favorite Weezer albums, so needed to have this one as well. Next up is another hole that I've been meaning to fill in my collection for quite some time, and that is King Crimson's 1974 classic album, Red. Just hard-hitting prog rock, King Crimson in their kind of power trio format, guitar, bass, and drums just pounding away. This is one of my favorite King Crimson albums. I think that's true amongst a lot of King Crimson fans. Just really hard-hitting, solid album. Not quite as much like meandering kind of psychedelic stuff that their very early stuff had, but just a little more hard-hitting rock music. At this point now, between their debut and before Thrack, which came out in the mid-90s, so of their 60s, 70s, and 80s output, the only studio album I'm missing now is Earthbound, which is not one of my more favorite ones of theirs anyway, but if I ever see it out there, then I'll get it, just to say that I have the set. And this is a 1974 pressing, so pretty excited to find that for a reasonable price. The sleeve is a little bit worn here. You'll see there's kind of a tear, but the record itself is still in great shape. Next up, and the last album that I got from the record fair in Des Moines is Miles Davis. This is one of his that I come back to a lot on streaming, but I've never found on vinyl for a good price. This is an early 80s pressing from what I can tell. So not quite original, but not super new either. And just happy to have it. Miles Davis is one of those guys, whenever I can find his stuff, I'm going to get it. And I've got a lot of my favorite albums of his, but he's just got so much material out there that it's going to take me my entire life to really get the whole catalog. All right, from the record fair in Des Moines, then a couple weeks ago, I went to Chicago to meet up with some coworkers I hadn't seen in a long time, and we hit a few record stores while we were in Chicago. The first one we went to was called Dusty Groove Records, and I got a couple of records there. First off, another Miles Davis, On the Corner, continuing to expand my Miles collection. Now, this is actually a new pressing of On the Corner. On the Corner is one of those that if I ever found an original pressing, it would probably be super expensive and very rare, so I'm happy to have this in the meantime. But this is from Miles' early 70s, kind of more fusion and groove-oriented phase. I really like this album a lot. The compositions and arrangements are so complex, so many different moving pieces, especially in the auxiliary percussion, and it's just a lot of fun to listen to. Kind of cool artwork on the background too. So yeah, Miles Davis, On the Corner. Check this one out if you haven't heard it. The other record that I got from Dusty Grooves is X's Wild Gift, X's second album, the classic Los Angeles punk band. This is a newer pressing as well. But I've got Los Angeles on vinyl, and I really needed this one too. Those are my two favorites of X's, so glad to have this one. From Dusty Groove Records in Chicago, we went to Sugar Records. Sugar was a really cool store. They had a lot of material there. To be honest, they focused a little bit more on new pressings, which isn't exactly what I was looking for. And it was a little bit pricey, so I only got one record there because this is one that I listened to a lot in the winter, and I told myself, if I see this out anywhere, regardless of price, I am going to get it, and so I did. And that is Muse's Origin of Symmetry. This is the 20th anniversary remix of the album. Got kind of a cool gatefold here with the lyrics, and then on the back, all the track listings. Kind of cool that they have it as sides M, U, S, and E to spell out the band name instead of A, B, C, and D. This is by far my favorite Muse album. Really, their first four records are the only ones that I come back to, but this is the only one that I think I can honestly say I love every track. I love this thing from beginning to end. Just great hard-hitting rock. And honestly, I've always been disappointed with how the original mix and mastering of this album sounded. I got the CD when I was in high school, and it's just, I noticed even right away, my high school self, whose ears were not quite as well tuned as mine are today, still noticed that it just felt like the album sounded a little lossy. And not of the best quality. And when I went back and listened to this on streaming, I noticed right away, like, holy crap, they really fixed the issues on this thing and just takes this album to a whole new level. So I really wanted this on vinyl, really glad to have found it. I'm probably going to be spinning this a lot this winter. Next, in Chicago, we went to a place called Reckless Records, which had a massive selection. I got a lot of great stuff just from the new arrivals bin there. Starting with this 1979 punk classic, the Raincoats self-titled debut. Great British punk band. Very interesting sound if you haven't heard this before. Just kind of like disconnected instrumentals, really driving punky as hell. So check this one out if you haven't. This is a more recent repress, actually on the Kill Rock Stars label. But this is one of those albums that I knew I had to have. Haven't particularly been looking for it, but when you see it and it's at a fair price, you definitely got to get it. Next up is Don Caballero's fourth album, American Don, from the year 2000. Don Caballero is a crazy post-rock band, just some of the most insane instrumentals that you'll hear. I, in particular, love the drumming on their albums. So check them out if you haven't heard them. I've got their debut for Respect on vinyl, and now this is the second one that I'm adding to my Don collection. And now we get into what I would call the treasure trove of 2000s and 2010s indie rock that I found at Reckless Records. That's an era of music that's really near and dear to my heart. I was in college, and Jake and I started the Velocities in Music channel. So a lot of music that was coming out in those times just feels very nostalgic to me. And there was a lot of great, innovative stuff coming out. So there were a lot of records from that era that I found that you don't really see all over the place. It's an era where, vinyl was starting to come back, but it wasn't really as big as it is now. So I don't think new albums were getting pressed in nearly as big quantities. That's just kind of my speculation based on what I've seen and read. So I don't know for sure. I'm sure it varies from album to album, but anyway, let's jump into that. So the first one is Animal Collective's Fall Be Kind EP. This is a kind of a sonic continuation of Merriweather Post Pavilion. That album came out in January of 2009, and this album came out later that same year. Pretty cool, it kind of, maybe a little bit darker and more experimental sound than Merriweather Post Pavilion, but this is an era of Animal Collective I really like. I like their early stuff too, and I know a lot of the hardcore fans prefer that, but that Strawberry Jam, Merriweather Post Pavilion kind of era is when I got into them, and this is an EP that I think gets a little overlooked sometimes, so check it out if you're an Animal Collective fan and maybe don't have quite as much experience with this one. Next up is Joanna Newsom's 2004 debut, Milk-Eyed Mender. From what I could tell, this has only been pressed once in 2004, which would make this a first pressing of this album, which 2004 doesn't seem like it should be so long ago, but it's just about 18 years ago at this point. Joanna Newsom is just one of the most unique artists out there. If you haven't heard her, please go check her out. She doesn't release music too often, but when she does, man, does it make an impact. There's so much care and thought put into all of her compositions and arrangements, so much interesting instrumentation with harp, these kind of floral orchestral arrangements, and then Joanna's voice, which is fairy-like in a way. Just really fascinating music. Check her out if you haven't. Really excited to have this one. Up next is Sunset Rubdown's Random Spirit Lover from 2007. Sunset Rubdown is an interesting group that has a lot of ties to other indie rock bands of the time, like Frog Eyes and Wolf Parade. Just good, kind of clangy, guitar-driven indie rock. this is a band that you don't really hear about much anymore, but I haven't forgotten about them. Go check them out if you haven't. Next is Deerhoof's 2008 album, Offend Maggie. This is the first Deerhoof album I have on vinyl, and while this probably isn't one of my more favorite Deerhoof albums, the great thing about them is they're a really solid band you just can't go wrong with. Everything they put out is quality, and they put out a lot of material, but I've also just never really seen them out and about in the wild. But like I said, a lot of good 2000s, 2010s indie rock when I went to Reckless Records in Chicago, and this was only $10. So yeah, if I see a Deerhoof record for $10, I'm gonna buy it, of course. What's cool about this one too that I like is this kind of black and white, like monochrome artwork, which continues on the inside gatefold, just kind of massive, like horizontal lines, almost looks like a barcode. But what's neat about that is it continues into the record itself too, which is white vinyl. So kind of neat. I like that they kept the theme there, really visually appealing packaging, and just great music overall from Deerhoof. Next up is Sharon Van Etten's 2014 album, Are We There? This is the album that really made me fall in love with Sharon Van Etten. The first time that I had heard her music was 2012's Tramp, which I was kind of like, this is a pretty good album, but I wasn't huge on it. But then this album came out, and I just love this thing front to back. Killer tracks, and I really think she's one of the best artists out there right now, especially after 2019's Remind Me Tomorrow, one of my favorites of that year. If not my favorite. I think it was like my first or second favorite of the year. This also has kind of a neat gatefold with like the handwritten lyrics over on the side. I really like that personal touch for very personal music, is what Sharon Van Etten tends to write. So check that one out if you haven't heard it. Next up is Dan Deacon's Gliss Riffer. I don't know if you'd really call this indie rock, maybe more indie electronica, but I thought Gliss Riffer was a terrific album, probably my favorite of Dan Deacon's. Just some killer tracks on here, like Feel the Lightning and When I Was Done Dying. Dan Deacon has an ability to take very glittery electronic music and add a lot of just profound depth to it. Puts a lot of meaning and feeling into the songs that really make you think at kind of an existential level. And I really love that about Dan Deacon. So check this one out if you haven't heard it. All right, the last leg of my record shopping activities in December was down in southern Illinois in the Carbondale area. Started out in a place in Carbondale called Plaza Records. They had a lot of really good used records there, which is usually what I'm looking for. Good selection of new ones too. But another hole in my collection I was excited to fill, David Bowie's Lodger. I already talked about Heroes earlier. I think Lodger is an incredibly underrated record in David Bowie's catalog. I actually like this one a bit better than Heroes. It was the final third album of his Berlin trilogy, and this one's cool. It's got this gatefold that opens up to these pictures on the inside, and if you take a look at the cover along with the back, this kind of stretched out, sprawled out image. At this point now, the only albums that I need from David Bowie's catalog from the 60s, 70s, and 80s are his self-titled debut and The Man Who Sold the World. So he put out a lot of records in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, so I'm excited to have most of them, and someday I will definitely get all of them. Next up is Meat Puppets 2, Meat Puppets' second record. Really great kind of underground rock band. I don't even really know how to classify Meat Puppets. They're not quite punk. They're not really like indie, but just kind of alternative underground rock from the 80s and 90s. And they also, Plaza Records, when I was there, they also had Up on the Sun, which is another Meat Puppets album I really like. I did not get that one. Part of me regrets it, but you can't get everything when you see it. You got to give yourself those ones that got away moments that you can come back and find years later and get excited about. So Up on the Sun is going to be one of those for me. But I'm glad to have Meat Puppets 2. and this is my first Meat Puppets record that I've found on vinyl, so excited to have it. The last album that I found at Plaza Records was St. Vincent's Strange Mercy. This is the album that came out after Actor, which is my favorite St. Vincent album. St. Vincent, just easily one of the best artists out there right now. She has never done anything remotely bad. Everything that she's done is just different shades of incredible, in my opinion. And Strange Mercy is my second favorite album of hers after Actor. So excited to have this one. Once again, gatefold with the lyrics on it. This has some really killer tracks like Cruel and Cheerleader. The guitar line in Cruel is just catchy as hell. Great guitar riff. This is in great shape too, so I'm excited to have it and continue to expand my St. Vincent collection. From there weren't really a whole lot of record stores in the area of Southern Illinois I was in, so I just hit up like Barnes & Noble, and the last couple records that I have came from there because there are some newer records that I want to get to. And so these last two are from 2021 and a couple of my favorites from 2021. So I'm going to cover this up because this is the uncensored version. But Halsey's If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power. Produced by Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. I'm a big Nine Inch Nails fan. I've always liked Halsey too, but to me, those two combined, the sounds just work incredibly well. I think that Atticus and Trent do a great job of supporting Halsey's tremendous vocals and just that kind of like vulnerability and depth that she's able to get out of her performances and her writing. So I love the production on this. I love the songwriting. There's kind of a cool gatefold on the inside here. And being that this is just one of my favorite albums of 2021, I had to have it. That's one of those that I knew the next time I saw it, I just needed to buy it. So now we're getting to the last album of the set here, and this is another one from Weezer, their first album to come out in 2021, OK Human. This is my favorite thing that Weezer has done in a long time, since at least the White Album. White Album was really good. I'm not sure if I like this one better or not. I might. But this one's up there for me within their catalog. On paper, I would say this album doesn't sound like it should work. It's basically Weezer without the guitar, or at least the electric guitar, which they've always been an electric guitar-centered band. But it just kind of reminds you that when you take those elements away, at its core, Rivers Cuomo is still just a terrific songwriter. So he's going to make it work. This is a little more piano and orchestra heavy, a lot of string arrangements. But I just love the writing on here. It's catchy as hell. It's fun. Just some of the best writing that I've heard from Weezer in a long time. Now, from what I've read, this album was recorded in analog, which makes this a very good medium to listen to the album on. I haven't had a chance to spin this and hear that for myself yet. That's just what I've read. But definitely if something is recorded in true analog, mastered for it, and pressed in the right way, then you're really setting yourself up for optimal sound quality. So I'm excited to experience that from my favorite Weezer record in quite some time. So that's it for me for December 2021. A lot of great finds. As I mentioned, several gaps filled in my collection that had been staring at me for a long time. Several artists that I'm just starting my collection for, like Meat Puppets and The Cure. So overall, a wild success for me. I'm excited to spend the rest of the winter spinning these and adding them to my shelves a little more formally. So let me know, which of these records that I got is your favorite? Which one would you be the most excited about? What records have you gotten recently that you're excited about? Let me know. Talk with me in the comments. I love to hear about this stuff. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I do a lot of other stuff on here, but whenever I have a good record haul, I'm definitely going to post about it as well. So, happy spinning, happy listening, and have a happy new year, everyone. Thanks.